Good evening, everyone.
Kavod Kacha, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay, so we're going to bet in the Bet Yosef. He says here, "ולא תגביה ידיה מן הפת להתעסק בעסק אחר." This is the language of the tour. So let's see the tour inside, so we can see the whole thing. Yeah, it says over here, "ולא תגביה ידה מן הפת," that when. So what he's saying here is like this, right? The tour, that when you're kneading the dough to make the matzot, you shouldn't stop doing that and start doing something else, right? To make some kind of interruption there. So he says, so what should you do? Finish the whole thing, right? Finish the whole batch before you start doing something else. And so he says, as we already mentioned, right, before, the lechatchila, you should do it in a way, making the matzot, that you never stop playing around with the dough. You never stop manipulating the dough. You have to keep on manipulating it all the time. So that's why we don't want you to start doing something else all of a sudden, Oh, gee, I have a text, I got a text. Somebody texted me. This is not the time now for texting, right? Shut down the texts, shut down your phone, whatever it is, right? And take care of your matzot, right? We don't want to be busy with other things when we're doing that. So that's what he's telling you over here. So lechatchila, that's the way it should be. Don't interrupt and do something else during the process of making the matzot. So then he goes on. So he says, right, again, right, the general rule is, all the while that you're playing with the dough, right, you're manipulating it, massaging the dough, right, whatever you want to call it, I don't know, right, it's not gonna leaven. You could do that all day. Can you imagine? You can all day play around with the dough and it won't leaven. So we're talking about 24 hours. That's a lot of time. So that's why we wanted to be always, right, moving, right, the dough. We want it to be always kinetic, moving around here, there, right, bending it out of shape here, right, the manipulation, right, to the massage, whatever. Okay, always want it to be moving around. אפילו רגע אחד אינו מחמיץ, ואם הניחו below עסק שיעור מיל הווה חמץ. So it says, right, that if you leave it without manipulating it for 18 minutes, so then it's chametz, right? There you go. It's too late, right? There's nothing you can do now. It's already chametz. ואם התחילו בבית יסוד כאחד וחמיצה אחד בידוע שהחמיצה גם השנייה. Oh, look what he says, very interesting. So he says, let's say they started, with two batches of dough, two doughs, and one of them leavened, right? So he says you can assume if one of them leavened, the other one is also leavened. Why is that? Because you started them together in one shot. So therefore, right, whatever applies to this one applies also to the other one. That's what he's saying. So he says that applies even if you don't see, right? Even if you don't see any signs that it's leavened, right? You don't see any physical signs. Nevertheless, we assume that it is. So he says, ואם החמיצה עד שיש בה סדקים, אפילו לא נתערבו, סדקיה, אז זה בזה, אלא אחד הולך, הנה, הנה ואחד הולך הנה, הרבה חמץ כאמור, והאוכלו חייב כרת. Look what he says, incredible, right? He says that, but if it got to the point already where, you're seeing like those, in the dough, right? You're seeing those cracks already. So why is it getting those cracks in the dough? That means that it's leavening, right, which is releasing gas, right, to the outside. When it leavens, it releases gas. So what happens is that once you see that, right, you can assume that it's already leavened for sure. And he says, if you eat that, right, you're being cut off from Israel because this you're eating like chametz gamur, right, real chametz. Okay, so he says that also applies even if right, those cracks are not touching each other, right? In other words, they're all separate, kind of like scattered. Nevertheless, those cracks indicate that your dough has already leavened. It's a sure thing, there's no question about it. Okay, good. But it says if there are no cracks, right? Just that it got, the white color, right? It got to pale color. So he said that's like, lower form of chametz, which is like, not really complete chametz, So therefore he says if you eat that, you're not really liable to being cut off because it's not really true chametz, right? It's not pure chametz there. וצריכה שני כלים של מים, אחד שמקטפת בו פירוש שטחה בו פני החללה, ואחד שמצננת בו ידיה. Interesting, right? So he says, right, that when you're making the matzot, okay, I guess we'll stop there. Well, let's go to Bet Yosef, right? That's a very different topic. Let's go to Bet Yosef. Okay, so it says Bet Yosef here. As we mentioned, right, that the Torah said you shouldn't, right, stop playing around with the dough and do something else, make an interruption. Right, so regarding that, it says Bet Yosef, Besot perek kol sha'ah, it's over there in this perek. Right, velo tagbiya yadea min hatanur ad shetigmor et hapat. So it says in the Gemara there, right, just like we said, that you shouldn't stop playing around with the dough until you, right, finish the whole baking process, right, from A to Z. So Rashi explains, right, what does that mean, practically speaking? That he's manipulating the dough, right, without stopping, right, continually. All the time. Katabaran, below Nehera. So the Ran says, no, it doesn't seem right, what the way he explains it here. Shein ken היה לו לומר, לא תגביה ידיה מן העיסה, it says because if it's so, right, that's the explanation, as we said, then it should have said, right, that he shouldn't take his hand away from the dough. לכך נראה שהחכמים אסרו עליה שלא תעסוק בדברים אחרים כלל, שלא תימשך אחריהם ולא תדקדק בשיעור. So he says the Ran something else, right, different way of explaining it. He says the reason why they told you not to do that is because he may forget, to come back and finish it. He may lose his trend of thought there, right, and lose his frame of mind. So therefore, what's going to be is that he's going to forget to come back and finish. So that's going to be obviously a problem, right? It's going to get leavened. So that's the way he explains it. אבל לא אסרו עליה לעסוק בעניין התנור, but he says they didn't forbid to play, to do things with the oven, ben time. Right? In other words, the process of baking the matzah that you can do those things, all the process that you need to do. And that we don't really mind, he says so much. That's not a big problem. Even though you're stopping to play with the dough for a second, right? To do something else, whatever it is, right? You need to do there with your matzah baking process. So that's so he says that's okay. But what we don't want, right, is the reason why we tell you not to do that is because you may come to forget to finish it. That's what he's saying. Okay. שהוא צורכו של הפת, ובלבד שלא תשהה, so he says, whatever is the need, for making the matzot, something like that you can do. Activity like that you can do. So what should you not do? Things which are not necessary, for, like a total distraction, not necessary for the process of baking the matzot. Things like that you should not do. Okay, according to this opinion, right, the Ran. But it says just one thing you got to make sure, right, that you don't wait too long. Right? What does that mean? As we said, right, the maximum you have is 18 minutes. So never go longer than that without finishing your job regarding the dough. We don't want you to go that long, right? But otherwise, right, just to do something quick, which is a part of the baking process, is okay. That's what he's saying. So he says, therefore, right, what he said was, don't right, stop playing around with don't stop the process of baking. That's what he meant to say, right? Not that you should stop playing with the dough. That's not what he said. What he said was, don't stop the process, the baking process. So what does that mean, practically speaking, right? Don't do things which are not related to the baking process. That's what we don't want. Ela beisko shel tanur, right? Rather, right, as we said, you can do things which are a part of the baking process. That's okay. But things which are outside of that, right, we don't want you to do. Okay, good. So it goes on. והרמב"ם כתב סתם, ולא תניח את העיסה ותתעסק בדבר אחר. But the Rambam seems to say like the simple opinion, right? Which is we saw before, which is, don't stop playing with the dough, right? That's the way he explains it. Not like the Ran. Okay. כתב רבי מגיד, נראה שהוא פירוש למה שאמרו, ולא תגביה ידיה מן התנור, או אפשר שהוא משנה. So says the Rabbi Magid, right? This is the explanation of why you shouldn't, right? Why you shouldn't stop playing with the dough. Or אפשר שהוא משנה משנה בפרק אלו. So it's going to be also it's a משנה in this פרק אלו עוברים in מ"ח עמוד ב' רבן גמליאל אומר, it says over there, it says רבן גמליאל, 3 נשים, 3 women, הוא פסק כחכמים עד כאן השנו, and he paskin like the חכמים. Okay, so what are we concluding from that? That Rambam seems to say, right, the simple opinion, which is that don't stop playing with the dough, right? And not like the Ran, who tried to explain it in a different way. He was explaining that it means, don't stop, doing the baking process and do something else, to distract you. That's the way he explains it. So the Rambam doesn't go that way, like the Ran, right? More like the Tur, how we read the Tur. Okay, so let's go on. וכל זמן שהם מתעסקים בו, אפילו כל היום אינו מחמיץ. But as we said, right, the Torah already mentioned that as long as you're playing around with the dough, it will not leaven, right? Even all day, it will not leaven. ברייתא בסוף פרק אלו עוברים. That's ברייתא over there in this פרק, מ"ח עמוד ב', כל זמן שעוסקים בבצק, again, right, it says over there in the same thing, that as long as you're playing around with the dough, אינו בא לידי חימוץ, right? It will not leaven. It's a rule, ironclad rule. So he says, right, that the two are also mentioned, right, as we read before, that if you leave it without playing around with it for 18 minutes, that's already chametz. So, right, the whole thing that we mentioned there. So it says regarding that the Bet Yosef, he brings a source. The perek elu overin, right? It's over there in this perek. Men Vav Odam Aleph. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah there. Batsek hacheresh im yesh kiyotze bo shechemitz asur. So it says over there, right, that the dough of the deaf mute, if there is something similar to that, that already got leavened, it's forbidden. Peresh Rashi explains, Batsek hacheresh. What does that mean, right? It's the dough of the deaf mute. She'en nikar im chemitz im lav. The thing is that we don't really know, right, if it got leavened or not. Because this guy, right, who's making it, cannot tell us what's going on. He can't speak. So he says, right. So he says it's like right. It's an analogy, right? That it's like a deaf mute. What does that mean? That we don't know what's going on, right? Like it's total mystery. Just like a deaf mute, is a mystery. We don't know what's going on with him. He can't talk to us. He can't, they'll tell us what's happening. So the same thing, with this matzah, we don't know what's going on. Okay. So he has ears, right? This deaf mute, but we don't know if he really hears you. What are you saying? So it says in Gemara like this, right? That if there is nothing similar to that, in other words, there's no two doughs, it's only one dough. So he says, then, right, how do we know that it's leavened? If right, as we said, we're talking about 18 minutes, which is the amount of time that it takes to walk a mil, right? A mil, which is a kilometer. Okay. Katua God Maimon says this rabbi, Beshem Rabbi Eliezer means, right? The name of this rabbi. Shiur zehu bebet bebait she'en bo esh. So it says this measure is regarding a house which doesn't have fire. Aval im yesh bo esh, but if there's fire there, or itaron chamimut, or there is some kind of a heat, mishad varim from other things. So it says then it's gonna go faster, the leavening process, according to the heat, right? According to the temperature. So it says therefore you gotta be mindful of that, right? Make sure that you understand your environment, right? And don't go too far because otherwise it'll be leavened. That's what it says in Mordechai. Katav Rosh b'tshuva. Cloud Yudal. It says the Rosh. Calls man sheoskin bebatzek eno machmitz. Again, right? He's repeating what we just said, which is that all the while that you're manipulating the dough, it will not leaven. Aval achar shenitasek bo nitchamem tachat yadayim. But it says once you play with it, right, and then it got heated up from all the movement, right, all the friction. Im yanichu belo esek miyad yachamitz. So then if you leave it like that, when it's hot, and you stop playing with it, it's gonna get leavened right away. Boom. Right? Because it's because of the temperature, the high temperature. Because of the heat. Okay, good. So he says, that's what it says in this rabbi also. Chilek Gimel, ובתרומת הדשן, also this rabbi, סימן ק"ח ג' in this chapter, כתב, דקיימלן דעים שהה בצק בלי מתעסקים, כשיר הילוך מי לחשבינן לכחמץ. So is that which we said, right? If you stop playing with it for 18 minutes, it'll become chametz. ואם לא שהה כשיעור הזה, and if you didn't wait that long, בפעם אחת, in consecutive time, right? Consecutively. אלא פעמיים, if it was like 2 times, with breaks, right? With pauses. Mitasekbo ben time, and he's playing around with it, in between. ומשהצטרפו השהיות, קודם שיפה So he says that once those, pauses, right, you combine them before you bake, have a kishur meal, it's going to be 18 minutes. If you combine all those pauses together, so he says one of the big rabbis said, right, that you should forbid this kind of a dough, right? So again, right, what is he saying over here? The novel idea, the chidush is like this, right? That what he's saying is that even though the pause, right, was not consecutive, and there was breaks in between where he was manipulating it, but nevertheless, right, if you combine all the pauses and they add up to 18 minutes altogether, right? It's still forbidden to eat that dough because we're concerned that it already became leavened. It's already chametz. Okay. So there's another rabbi who says the opposite, right? He says that no, we're not concerned about that. Why is that? Because there was pauses, right? In between. So it wasn't like 24, it wasn't 18 minutes consecutively. So therefore, we're lenient, he says. So we have two different opinions, right? Two opposing opinions. Okay. ואחד מרבותא השיב שאם העסק בין שאר לשהייה עסק גמור הוא כגון בעיטת הידיים בבצק, כגון הרידוד שמרדדים המצות בעץ עגול, כי גבנה אין השהייה מצטרפין, השהיות מצטרפין, בעסק כזה יכול לבטל מה שכבר התחיל להחמיץ, אבל עסק אחד מועט, על פי שיש בו כוח לעכב שלא יתחיל להתחמץ כל זמן שמתעסקים בו, כי נמוכח בכיתוב שעדינו עסק גדול ואפילו הכי מעכב החימוץ, כדי תבידיה פרק אלו עוברים אמנם. Okay, so, right, what he's saying here is like this, that we have also another, right, he makes a differentiation, right, he qualifies this, so I'll explain to you how he qualifies it. He said, right, it depends on, this halakha depends, as we said, there's one rabbi who is stringent, one rabbi who's lenient, right? So he says it really all depends on, when you took those breaks, right, and you started to knead the dough again, were you kneading it like, with vigor, like a really, somebody who's baking bread, or, just a little bit, just moving around a little bit, not really in a vigorous way. So he says, right, it all depends on that. That if you're doing it with vigor, so then those times that you were resting the dough, right, and not moving it around are not going to combine because the vigorous kneading, right, the vigorous manipulation of the dough is going to prevent it from leavening either way. But he says if you're just doing something, minimal, not really very vigorous, so then it's not going to be able to, right, prevent it from, from becoming leavened. If you have 18 minutes altogether combined in between the pauses. So that's how he qualifies this, right? That's why that's how he reconciles the two different opinions. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. And then he says, כתב אין בו, ואומנם כל כך אין בו כוח לבטל מה שהתחיל כבר לחמיץ, וכן נראה והביא ראיה לדבר, ובסוף דבריו כתב, he says he brought also a source for this, what he's saying here, this theory, right, that he presented. בסוף דבריו כתב, לכך נראה שהניכור שמנקרים המצות, אגב יש לחשבו לעסק לעניין זה. So he says, even though, right, that regarding the nikur, right, which means that you're like, you're, how do you call this? You're making like those little holes in the dough, right? Pricking, like you're pinching it, pricking it, pricking the dough, right? Making those little holes, whatever, something like that. Yeah, that's what he means. That's what he's talking about. So he says that, that's like a very minimal kind of manipulation. It's not really something very strong. So that would be like, an example of something minimal. So in other words, it will do the job of preventing it from leavening, minimal type of manipulation, but it won't do the job of, breaking up those pauses, right? So, that should be considered like, that it didn't combine the times that it was resting. it's not that strong, right? So you need a stronger, right, type of vigorous manipulation for that. Okay. אף אגב, יש לחשבו לעסק לעניין זה, לבד יחשב שכל זמן שעוסקים בו אינו בא לידי חימוץ. מכל מקום, לא חשיב עסק כל כך לבטל השיות, right? That's exactly what I just told you, that's what he says here. כתוב עוד בתרומת הדשן, right? It says in תרומת הדשן, שיעור מרביעית שעה, right? וחלק ו20 מן השעה. So now he tells you, right? How much is the size of the meal, right? In other words, what are we talking about? We just said, right? It's 18 minutes. That's according to halacha, it's 18 minutes. But he's explaining to you, right? How do you measure this? Right? So meal, as we said, it's about a kilometer, right? So it's exactly 2,000 amot, to be precise. Each amma, right, is like half a meter. So what does that mean? That it says, right, how much time does it take to walk one mil, right, 1 kilometer approximately? Right, it's about, he says, a quarter of an hour and a little bit more. Right, so what is a quarter of an hour? 15 minutes, right? I think I'm doing the math right. I hope I'm not that bad. A quarter of an hour is 15 minutes, right? Okay, I just got a thumbs up. Okay, all right, good. I guess I passed the grade, so I'm getting a passing grade. Okay, so I won't fail altogether. So what do you call it, right? So, but he says a little bit more, right? So what's that little bit more? As we said, right? Quarter is 15. So a little bit more is 18, 3 more minutes, right? So therefore, right, 18 minutes is the proper time for one meal. So it takes 18 minutes to walk 1 kilometer, right? For the average person, right? Your average Joe. Okay. Good. So, all right. So anyway, right, as we said, that's the size. But anyway, according to Rambam, it's larger, the meal. According to Rambam, it's 22 minutes, right? But we don't paskin like the Rambam here, in that case, right? In this particular case. So according to Rambam, it's 22, but according to Shulchan Aruch, it's 18. So therefore, we go like the Shulchan Aruch, and we say it's 18 minutes, right? So therefore, as we said, right, what's the bottom line with that? The bottom line is don't ever leave your dough, right, up to that point of 18 minutes, because otherwise it's already leavened, right? What are we talking about? When you didn't manipulate it, right? But if you manipulate it, as we said, right, it's okay all day. You can manipulate it all day, right? But as we said, right, don't take breaks. You got to keep on doing it all the time, right? That's the thing. So, okay. So hopefully, right, you're following my trend over here. And let's see what else we got here. לפי חשבון מהלך אדם בינוני 10 פרסאות ביום שהוא 12 שעות. So he says, right, that the average person can walk, right, 10 parsaot, right? Each parsa is 4 mil, right? So the average person can walk about 40, right, mil a day, which is about 18 miles. I don't know, God knows, whatever it is, right? Something like that. So yeah, that's the story. So what does that mean? If he's walking for 12 hours a day, that's how much he'll cover. Whatever. Anyway, right? So as we said, it's 18 minutes, right? So trust me, right? And just accept that 18 minutes in the number, right? The size. Okay. So that's the story. And then he goes on to say, right? The Torah. If it got already so leavened, right, that it's already cracks in the dough, right, that's already like 100% chametz, right? So nothing you could do at that point. I mean, your goose is cooked, right? So you have to throw that dough away. There's no way to to keep that dough for Passover. Either give it to a goy or sell it to a goy, whatever it is, right? Whatever you want to do. But certainly you cannot keep that, right? Or you cannot eat it, that's for sure. Right? Mishnah Sham, it's a Mishnah, right? That's what it says there. Mem chet amud bet, seor isrof ve'ochlo patur. Siduk isaref ve'ochlo chayav. So it says, right, that again, it says in the Mishnah that if it's already, cracked, right, it's got those cracks, so that dough has to be burned, he says, right? Because, you can't use it. And if a person eats it, he's chayav, he's liable for karet, right, for cutting off. Right? So he says, what are we talking about here, right? That if it got so bad where, there's cracks in the dough and they're also like touching each other, overlapping those cracks. So that's like totally chametz, right? 100%, right? Nothing to talk about. Okay, good. And so that's Rabbi Yehuda, but according to Chachamim, according to rabbis, right, which is the majority here, right, they're saying it's even worse. That that even if they didn't get yet, right, overlapping those cracks, and they're not touching each other, each one is like scattered, whatever. Nevertheless, it's still total chametz, and therefore you're cut off by eating that. So he says, so then when is it, that it's not total chametz? When it got like pale color, white. That's not total chametz yet, right? It's just like on the border there. Okay. Rashi, so he says like a person who, his hairs are standing on his head. Okay, Uperesh Rashi, Karne Chagavim, Sedek Lekan, Vesedek Lekan. So Rashi explains, right, that what does it mean that it's like the horns of the grasshopper, right, whatever, right, those things that they have. He says that means that they're not touching each other yet, right? They're not that advanced. They're all scattered. So he says because so Rashi explains, right, that the halacha is that that even if they're not touching, right, they're not overlapping yet. Those cracks, those right, they're still it's still real chametz. Okay, so but then what is something which is not true chametz yet? Right, it's on the border. That he's absolved, right? שפטור זה שאין בו סדק, אבל הכסיפו פניו כאדם שעמדו סירותיו מתוך פחד ורטט שפניו מחשיפים. Right, so he says, right, that's a person like, his hairs are standing on his head. By the way, what does that have to do with the dough? What, the dough has hairs? Right, what's going on with that? So no, we're not talking about the dough has hairs. So Rashi explains what it means is like this, right? That it's like a person, his hair is standing on his head. When does a person's hair stand on his head? When does that happen? When he's frightened, right? When he's shocked, or he's in shock, right? Something has frightened him, shocked him. So in a case like that, he gets really like pale. His face becomes pale, like whatever. So if it gets to that point where the matzah, the dough looks like very pale like that, so then it's already right, not at that point of the right those right the cracks. It's not there. It's like semi kind of like quasi chametz status there. Okay, good. So that's the story there. That's the Bet Yosef. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch, and we can stop there, I guess. Let's see what's going on there. Shulchan Aruch. Lo yanichu ha'isa belo esek, right? It says, so right, as we said, lechatchila, you should never stop manipulating the dough, right? That's what we're saying. Always play around with it. Like, you're always playing with it, like something like, You just like you got ants in your pants. You can't stop playing with it. Don't stop that, right? He says even one moment. He says you shouldn't leave it. So lechatchila, that's what we want, right? We want you to play around with that dough, manipulate it all the time, like you're massaging it, like throwing it around and bending it, and twisting it and this and that, right? Things like this, right? Uh, so we want you to do that. Also, by the way, you know what else? What else? What else qualifies for that? If you're taking your roller, right, and you're rolling the dough, like flattening it, right, with the roller. That's also called manipulation. So if you're doing that, that's also good. In other words, you're playing around, all the time, playing with it. And so keep doing that all the time until you get it into the oven. That's what we want, right? So says Shulchan Aruch, right? The whole zman shemitaskim bo. By the way, if you go to a bakery, right, a matzah bakery, if you go visit, one of these bakeries, you'll see that's exactly what they do. And that's why it's like a very busy place. The bakery, the matzah bakery, it's always like moving. There's a lot of motion there going on. It's like very kinetic. So never stops moving over there, right? So that's what's going on. People have a lot of energy over there in those factories. So yeah, that's the way it is, right? So he says all the while that you're manipulating it, afilu kolayim, even if it's all day, it won't leaven. Can you imagine? 24 hours, just keep on going. It will not leaven like that.
The Ashkenazim over in Crown Heights do both, though. They keep it moving and they get it in the oven right before 18 minutes.
Yes, that's what you really should do, lechatchila, In other words, this, of like manipulating it all the time is like a chumrah. But lechatchila, we want you to be like, very cautious about this. You know what I mean? So what does that mean? We don't want you to rely on the fact that you're going to be putting it in within 18 minutes. That would be enough according to halacha. You know what I mean? But we want you to be more cautious, a little bit extra. That's what you're talking about. You know what I mean? The truth is, that experienced bakers who, have already done matzah baking, and they know how to do it, they usually get the dough in the oven by 5 minutes, not 18 minutes. You understand? It's usually, 5 minutes. They're going like super fast, like a rocket, That's the way it is. So, if a person is getting up to 18 minutes, right, he's not a professional. He's a tremendous amateur. Okay, you get the idea. So yeah, okay, but look, listen, sometimes you have to be a beginner, so when you start out, things are not so quick, and then you get used to it, right? You get the hang of it, and then you already know what you're doing. My son, used to do this job. He used to write. He worked in a matzah factory in Williamsburg, in Brooklyn. He worked there for about 4 or 5 years like that. Now he stopped, and now he got richer, so he doesn't need the money anymore. He's got enough money without it. But before, when he was struggling, he was working there, right? And so now he knows the job really good. He's like a professional. That's what happens, right? When you do it every year. And as I said, right, that they start baking over there in those bakeries like 3 months before Passover. They're already like baking now. For sure. 2 months before. Right? They're already in the process. So that's the way it is. Because they make a lot of batches, they sell a lot. It's a big business, lots of money there going on. Right? So that's the way it is. Right, so that's what we're talking about. Okay. So as we said, right, usually it's like a 5-minute, 10-minute thing, it never gets up to 18 minutes, so this process. If the person knows what he's doing. Okay, so anyway, right, as we said, so it says, again, right, as we said, if you left it without playing with it, right, for 18 minutes, it's chametz. You can assume, right? ושיעור מיל הווה ברביעית שעה בחלק מ-20 מן השעה. So he says, right, how much is the meal? Right, that we measure. So as we said, right, it's a quarter of an hour plus, right, 1/10, which is 18 minutes, right? 1/4 plus 1/10. right? So that's pretty much the story there. I'm sorry, I didn't say, I said it wrong, right? Not 1/10, 1/20th, right? So if you add 1/4 and 1/20th, what does it come out to be, right? Of an hour? 18 minutes exactly. Right? Again, right? I don't want to mess up the math over here, look like an idiot. So this is what it should be. Okay. Right. So by the way, I went to school in the old days, they didn't have, we didn't even use calculators most of the time. So, I'm from the old school, so whatever. So I better be on the ball. Otherwise, okay. So, ויש להחמיר למהר בעניין עשיית המצוות, כי יש לחוש שהשהיות יצטרפו לשיעור מיל. So it says the Rama exactly what you said, right, Shoshana? Right, it says the Rama that you should try to do this as quick as possible. You know what I mean? Don't oh yeah, we got time, yeah, let's smoke a cigarette, and then we'll finish. What are you talking about? You know what I mean? Get this done already, don't play games. So says the Rama, why you have to be so quick with this, in other words, as quick as possible, because he says, right, that we're concerned that you'll do pauses, in the right in the manipulation, and it'll combine together. And like we saw in Bet Yosef, there are those who say that it does combine the pauses. So therefore, you got to make sure, right, that you do it as fast as possible. Therefore, there should be no concern whatsoever. That's what we're saying, right? Okay, good. Another thing, right, he mentions also, which we saw in the Bet Yosef, the Rama, is that, don't put it in a hot place, right? Make sure you don't put it in a hot place. Because, the heat, right, the high temperature will also cause it to leaven. So, just make sure, right, you're working, in a place which is not too hot, right? They're like room temperature kind of thing. We don't want it to be like a sauna in there, you know what I mean? That's not a good thing. Okay, so ואחר שנתעסקו בבצק ונתחמם בידיים, אם יניחו בלא עסק מיד יחמיץ. So it says in Shulchan Aruch, right, something we saw in the Bet Yosef, very important to understand, right? So he says, once you start playing with the dough, okay, and it gets heated up, the temperature gets high because of the manipulation, because of the friction, right, that occurs. So if you stop at that point, when you're manipulating it and it's hot, the dough, and you stop manipulating it, it's going to become chametz right away. So you got to be careful, really careful with that. Don't play around with that. So now you see, right, why they're so careful in the bakeries, to do it so fast, because, we don't want any problems, we don't want any headaches with this. We want to make sure everything is done as quickly as possible, right? And we don't want to, get into these pitfalls, this is like a pitfall, right? What's a pitfall? Again, right? That you start to manipulate the dough, got heated up, and then you stopped. Boom, it's chametz right away. Bam. Right, so that's scary. That's dangerous. והם התחילו בשתי עיסות כאחד, והחמיצה האחד בידוע שהחמיצה השני. He also brings what we saw in Bet Yosef, right? That if you have two doughs, right, and you start working them together, if one of them became chametz, you can assume also the other one's chametz, since you started together. אפילו אין רואים לסימני חימוץ. He says, even if you don't see signs of leavening, right? But you can use this test, which is that, they're both like the same. So you start at the same time. ואם החמיצה עד שיש בה סדקים, so he says, now we're getting to the more extreme cases. If it already got to the point where there's cracks there, right? Even if though they didn't overlap yet, right? Those cracks, they didn't connect, right? They're just scattered yet, right? They're not yet overlapping. That's already like total chametz, right? Forget about it. Nothing to talk about. So therefore, if you eat it, you're liable to cutting off, right, from the Jewish people, because you ate chametz on Passover. But he says if it just got pale, right, like that guy with the hair standing on his right head. So there you're absolved, right, if you eat that. So what does that mean? We can't really cut you off, because of that. What's the reason why we can't cut you off? Because it's not really a sure thing that's chametz yet. It's like on the border. So therefore, we say, yeah, you did the wrong thing for sure, but we're not gonna, go right. We're not gonna punish you so severely like that. So says the Rama here, right? ואם המצה עשויה ויראה שלא תבוא על ידי חימוץ, מותר לשברה ולחזור ולעשותה, כדי שהעסק יבטל החימוץ, מי הוא טוב להיזהר לכתחילה. Interesting. So it says, right, that if the matzah is already made. So what does that mean, made? I think he means to say it's already kneaded, right? They already kneaded the dough, and he's afraid, right, that it's going to come to leaven, right, at this point. So he says you can break them up, into smaller pieces, and then do it again. So why do you want to do it this way? So because the fact that you're manipulating it will save it from becoming leavened, right? Mi will tov lizaher lechatchila. But he says lechatchila you should be careful. What does that mean to be careful? Don't come to that point, right, where it's gonna get to this point already. So what is Ramah telling you here, right? More or less, right? What are we saying here in this final piece here? He's saying like this, right? That if you have already made the dough and it's ready, it's ready to go, but for some reason, right, it's like getting delayed, whatever. So he says, and you want to prevent it from leavening. So what you do is, right, continue the manipulation, don't stop. And this way, right, just in case, that if you, so what is it? He says, break it up into smaller pieces. Right. You break it up into small. In other words, if you have a big dough, right, what you do is breaking up into smaller pieces and manipulate those pieces. And this way, right, it'll save you from, becoming leavened until you get into the oven. Because once you get into the oven, it's okay. That's it. You're saved. The oven saves you. So, but the point is, right, that we want to save you until that point of getting into the oven. So how do you do that? The says Ramah, right? If you're in a little bit of a trouble, a little bit, of a difficult situation, break up the dough into smaller pieces, right, and manipulate it until you get into the oven. This is the way to save it. Okay, so that's what he's saying. Okay, so I hope you guys understood pretty much more or less what I said. If you have any questions, let me know. Right? Otherwise, Bezat Hashem will continue tomorrow. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Bezat Hashem. And we should all be experts in making matzot, Bezat Hashem, so we can make like the proper mitzvah, which is after midday, right? On Erev Pesach. We're gonna Bezat Hashem, billionaire. One day we'll come to do that, right? All of us, billionaire. Bezat Hashem. So we can do the mitzvah the real proper way. Amen, amen. Okay, so we'll see you tomorrow, Bezat Hashem. Laila Tov, Chazak Baruch.
Thank you so much.
All the best.